Good morning. Happy Sabbath. It's good to be here. We just want to tell our story. We've been working together for 18 years. And my beginning understanding of the need to have the gospel and the medical being combined goes back to my college days at Pacific Union College, where I took a class and I was given an assignment to read a book by the name of The Healing of Persons by Paul Tournier, a French physician who was finding that he was having a problem getting his patients complete healing. He would come up against a brick wall. And so he went back to school, got a degree in religion, so he could learn how to connect the gospel with the medical. And at that point, he was able to bring his patients to complete healing. It was an incredible book, and it opened my mind, and I thought, I think I've heard some of this stuff someplace else, like in the Spirit of Prophecy. And so it began to resonate in my mind, and wherever I went as a pastor, I would begin to do health ministry outreaches to the community. And so it was a beginning, but it's taken me a lifetime to learn the real connection that needs to happen between a pastor and a physician. So, John, how about you?
So I went to medical school because it was a physician who brought me to Christ, and I decided that I was going to be like that physician. It was a physician who had a standard medical practice. He was actually a general surgeon and the only one in town, quite busy, and yet I counted at one point, brought 45 souls to the truth that were baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He did this through constant Bible studies, and Bible studies were what he provided to my family. My mother was his patient. He asked her, would you like Bible studies? He saw a need. It was a deeper need than just her physical complaints. She said yes, and he came over to the house. I was quite reluctant. At the time, we lived on a ranch. My father was out of work. We didn't have a lot of money at the time. We survived by me butchering out the rabbits and the chickens and the pigs and the whatever goats and putting that on the table. That's how we lived. And here is a Seventh-day Adventist physician, this precious man who came into our home to share with us the gospel truth. And over time, I became convicted. Convicted so much that I kept the Sabbath, and to the point where there was tension in the home because of Sabbath keeping. And eventually, I was able to go to Monterey Bay Academy, where I became a Seventh-day Adventist. Because when I first went to our educational institution, I was not a Seventh-day Adventist. Hear that for those of you who are in education. I was brought to Christ finally in our educational institution. And in that point, I looked back on my experience and said, I want to be a medical missionary physician like my father-in-law, because the man who eventually became my father-in-law was the man who had given me Bible studies. And it was actually his daughter who he had brought over from the weekly witnessing program from Monterey Bay Academy, who was actually giving Bible studies to my brothers and I. And so when I was 16 years of age, I met my wife, although we didn't know it. 7 years later, we would be married. And ever since then, I found a very fascinating principle that's important. Number one, do not be unequally yoked. Whether it be in ministry or whatever, this woman has driven ministry. And I would share this with every person who wants to be a minister of the gospel, to be aware that whatever is your environment, it will affect your ministry. And that's the first principle I learned. I decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist physician, and through a series of events, a medical missionary, and started medical practice in a typical medical practice in California, Hanford, California. At that point, I had gone to this practice. They were my brothers in Christ. They were my brothers that were Seventh-day Adventists, but when I went there, the idea was to be a medical missionary physician, and they were aware of that. In the end, that is not what had happened, and I was dissatisfied. And I shared with them, this is the time, guys. Are we going to do this or not? And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't interested enough in the science of medicine to continue it if I wasn't going to be a medical missionary. And I didn't know exactly what that looked like because I didn't have any examples. And from this point forward, I began a journey that provided, I think, an opportunity for examples to those who would come behind so that they did not have to repeat the mistakes and errors and difficulties that I faced. They can actually stand upon the experience of others and learn without having to experience the difficulties, and then make their own mistakes, but at the same time live at a higher level and more capacity than I was able to start with.
So starting pastoral work in Northern California Conference, I worked in the Bay Area for a few years and probably did like 12, 15 stop smoking clinics, different health outreaches and so forth. So wherever I went, I would try to connect my outreach to health work. And eventually was invited to get involved with church planting, and so was asked to go to the Coeur d'Alene, Hayden area in northern Idaho to plant a church. And while I was planting that church, I became convicted that I needed to have a doctor as part of my church family that I could work with as a partner in ministry. I'd already had worked with doctors all the way along, but never really had a real close personal bonded relationship with a physician. But I just felt like, we need to have a united ministry, not just clocking in at the same time, same place for a particular work. We need to have a united ministry. And so as we were building that church and planting it and building it, I thought, I started praying about this. And I read an article in the North Pacific Union Gleaner. It's their news magazine. I read an article about a doctor by the name of John Torquato. And I said to myself, that's the very type of doctor I want to work with. At the time, he was working in Moscow, Idaho, in a ministry there. And so I made contact with him, and over the next couple of years, we visited a number of times and began to develop a kind of a dream together. And John, when I invited you to come up to the Coeur d'Alene, Hayden area, you had some questions for me.
Well, let me just say that the time that I spent in Moscow, Idaho, the transition from California, where I was in my first medical practice for about a year and a half, to Moscow, Idaho, in order to go to Moscow, I had received a card in the mail from a practice in Moscow that said, would you like to work in medical ministry side by side with pastors to turn the community into a recipient of God's grace? And I'm thinking, sign me up, brother. So I contacted them and I said, this is the thing. This is what I wanted to do. I didn't know what it looked like. In the end, I didn't know what medical ministry was supposed to be because I didn't have any great examples at the time of what it looked like in real life. And so I said, sign me up. And so I flew up on my own dime. I went up to Moscow, Idaho, and I said, hey, look, I'm not here to be recruited, but I want to take this back to my partners back in Hanford, California. And so show me what you got. They showed me all this. It was amazing. I could work with the pastor side by side. I could do work in the community as well as work in the clinic. I could help to make a community more healthy, and I could help to establish a conduit, a catalyst for the local church members who were in the pew to actually take their expertise, which they didn't know they had yet, and move them into the community as servants of the Lord, doing health ministry. That was to me, amazing. One caveat is I had to take a pastor's salary. Well, I was already at the low end of a growth cycle in medical work, which was far above a pastor's salary. And it was really a situation of stress and duress and difficulty. But I prayed about it long and hard, and my wife, again, she brings clarity to life. She says, "Has God called you there?" And I said, "Yeah, I think he has." She said, "Then what are you waiting for?" I said, "Sweetheart, you grew up in the home of a surgeon. You know what life could be like. And you're going to take on this life of the wife of a man who's on a pastor's salary, has all the efforts of a physician, and yet none of the benefits. And many of the issues of a pastor, but again, none of the benefits. So what is this going to be like for you?" She says, "I didn't ask that question. I asked, were you called?" And I said, "Yeah, we're called together. What are you waiting for?" So we went. So I'm working for 6 years in this, and we did amazing things in Moscow, Idaho. It was tremendous, and I got to work side by side with an amazing pastor, Pastor Doug Venn. Then I got approached by Pastor Cablano, and he said, "You know what? It's been 6 years. I know you're planning to, move on to another practice now. It's been 6 years of mission service, and so you're ready to go. And I want to offer you an opportunity to come up and join me in church planting in the Coeur d'Alene area." Now, I had already been looking around, and 3 hours south of me, there was an offer on the table for over $160,000, which 20 years ago was a lot of money. And I said, "I've got this offer already. What do you have to offer me?"
And I told him, "Nothing." And I meant nothing. Because we had just started planting a church from scratch, from nothing. And we were building a church, our first facility. We had nothing to begin with.
So I, being the curious type, had to be sure of what he meant by nothing. So I started going down the list. I said, "All right, so I've got a guaranteed wage over at this place, plus all kinds of administrative help and all this support and help of setting up an office and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have a guaranteed wage?" And you said?
"Nope."
"Do you have any staffing for me to use?"
"Nope."
"Do you have any a place for me to work?"
"Nope."
"Do you happen to have any equipment I could use?"
"Nope."
"Do you have anybody that you could refer to me so I could make an income?"
I said nothing.
He meant nothing. And so with this in mind, again, it was a challenge. And as I was praying about it, my wife and I, what has God called you to do? All right. Eventually I said, Lord, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I've never started with nothing before. But do not despise the day of small beginnings. The Lord can do a thing, and it doesn't have to be your thing. It's going to be his thing, and it's going to be his way. And so don't expect to know what that looks like. And you just keep moving forward, one step in front of the other. And so we decided to go to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
And, John, if I knew at the time when I invited you to come, what I know now as far as what that puts you through, I probably would not have had the audacity to invite you.
Yeah. So I was tasked with starting a practice up near Pastor Cablano's, and he was in Hayden, Idaho, and I started a practice near the typical place where you start a practice, near the hospital. But I didn't have any money, and so I started a practice in the back end of a rented physical therapy office where I could get 4 8x10 rooms and a hallway with access to the bathroom, and I did not have access to the front desk at all. And I didn't have any staff, and I didn't have any advertisement, and I didn't have any patients, and I didn't have any income, and I began to build the infrastructure of what a practice could look like. And I started to put together a computer, and I started to put together printers and equipment and EKGs and phones, and just all the things you have to do by myself. And for the next 6 months, I worked solo, which means you're a solo practitioner with no office help. And so I would advertise to the patients, I would do all my enrollments with the various insurances, credentialing, etc., which is really a hassle because insurance are terrible to work with, and I can tell you firsthand. And then I would come in, the patients would come into my office. I was the one that greeted them. I was the one that registered them. I was the one that did their vitals. I took them in the back and did their medical visit. I did their EKGs, their blood draws. I sent them on their way. I did their follow-up for labs, and I was the one that billed. And I did all of that for 6 months. It was the hardest 6 months of my life. I don't know how I survived. In fact, I asked my wife, how did we do that time? And she just looks at me and kind of shakes her head. It was hard. And so we managed. I probably made less in that year than I made in internship, which was really not a lot in the first place. But we kept moving forward. And in time, I was able to hire staffing, and it was an amazing blessing because I hired Seventh-day Adventist staff. And I learned some of the principles of running a medical practice that is a mission practice because I started from the ground up. And do not despise the day of small beginnings because the Lord was able to do something in that practice that I wasn't able to do otherwise, and that was make sure it was focused on Him rather than just focused on medicine. And if it hadn't started like that, I might have been just kind of bowled over into the typical medical practice and not realize there was a difference in medicine practice if I had started another way. So for that, I was grateful.
So, John, you had to teach me some things. You had a close relationship with Doug Venn, your previous pastor, and I had never had a real close relationship with a physician. And you had to teach me the unity that needed to be existing between a pastor and a physician in a joint ministry. And so we began to meet together on a regular basis, going through the book Ministry of Healing together with a few other people. We would go on walks together. We would just do things together just to get a bonded relationship and to get us operating on the same page.
So what we discovered early on is that, as Pastor Cablano already alluded to, you cannot just walk into a facility and punch the same clock as your counterpart. There's a pastor and a physician job description. And in order to meet the job description of both the pastor and the physician, you need to have trust and love with one another. Describe what that job description looks like before I go any further.
The job of the pastor is to keep the physician focused on the gospel.
That's in the middle of practice.
Yes. And the job description of the physician is to connect the pastor with the community and keep the pastor practical in his work.
Now, when this happens, where you're trying to have this crossover of boundaries, if you will, this commingling of expectations with one another, there is a level of benefit that happens when you're working together, that when you start to care about one another, really love one another, you leave the average routine daily existence of practice and you enter what I consider the level of the divine. You enter the level of miraculous. Because miraculous things happen when you have love for one another that is different than what happens when you are just clocking in on the same time clock.
So one day when we were meeting together, I said, John, get in my car. Let's go for a drive. And I took him up on a mountain just outside of the city, and where we could have a nice view over the city. And I said to John, give me that city.
I said, what? Why are you asking me?
Because you have connection to that city. You have people come into your office daily from that city.
And so I want you to think about the transitions now that have happened from the beginning to the end. So first of all, I am in a practice, and I've got in front of me the possible rewards of the typical physician, which I kind of expected, honestly. I recognized this was the next thing. And I was moved out of that into a place where I'd be working essentially for nothing, doing all this work at the call of a pastor. And so the point I'm going to make about this is something that is it's an essential principle for you to realize, that our pastors do not despise the beginning, the day of small beginnings, but also the power of the pastoral call is amazing. The power of the pastoral call is enough to move souls, because it's not the pastor's connection specifically as a person. It is the pastor's connection to the gospel and to Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is twice inspired. It's once inspired spoken, it's once inspired when it's received in the heart. And so the pastor can make the call. It's in the heart of the person who receives the call that God is now at work. So do not think that the pastoral call is weak. It's powerful. And that is something that pastors need to understand. And then, besides this power that pastors wield that they don't even know about, they don't even understand the power they carry at their disposal. Because God has given them the unction of the gospel. He's given them the desire to share with the world, and God is blessing that, even without their knowledge sometimes. Before I left, I was actually in the valley of decision. Should I go to this place, or should I stay and take this salary that was south of me? And there was an elder in my church. And he was an elder who had seen some of the difficulties and some of the pain that I had gone through in the places that I had been. And I'll tell you that as a medical missionary, you need to know it will not be easy, because the evil one does not want to see this move forward. It's the opening wedge, and he doesn't want it. He wants to do anything that he can to keep it from happening. And so there will be difficulties that you'll face. And this elder came to me one day just before I was leaving town, and he found out I was going north instead of south. And he came for some business, and after we completed our business, he says, "Well, I came for something else." I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "I know where you're going, and I know what it's going to take." He says, "And if you will receive my hand, I will ordain you to the medical ministry right here and now." I said, "In my office?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Just you?" He says, "I am an elder of the church, and as the elder of the church of God, I have the authority to set you aside for the work of Jesus Christ." And so in my office, I got down on my knees, and he put a hand on my head and a hand up to the Lord, and he prayed a dedicatory prayer. Now, I told you what that first year was like. That was not the all of it. There was more to come over the many years that would come. And it was on the power of that ordination and that prayer that got me through all of the pain, that kept me solid serving the Lord in all of that time. So do not neglect the power of the church's ordination to keep a person solid in the work of God. It is a power that you don't know that you wield. Like the pastor who doesn't know that they wield power when he has a pastoral call. It's the church's ordination that holds people in faith and encouraged and gives them inspiration to follow the Lord's Spirit wherever he leads. And now, I have a pastor who says, "Give me that city." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "I'm at the back end of a physical therapy office 7 miles down the road." Says, "That's what I'm asking." So I moved my practice to Hayden, Idaho, into a strip mall within view of that mountain And I began seeing patients, and I pulled together a little bit of a team now. And I've got a nurse practitioner that's working with me. And between the two of us, we're seeing 5,000 patients a year. The city of Hayden at the time was 10,000 people. We were seeing the equivalent of half the population of our city per year. Now, of course, we drew from a wider area. We drew from the county and from different cities around us. But the point is, do not despise the day of small beginnings. Do not despise the power of the pastoral call. Do not neglect the power of the church's ordination, and do not minimize the power of the pastoral vision. Because God's work moves forward, and it doesn't happen if you are not loving and trusting one another. It doesn't happen because, this is just my job, that's what I do. No, it's because, you know what? I love and trust a person. And in recognizing, loving, and trusting a person is like loving and trusting Jesus. You leave the realm of routine, of mundane, of every day, and you enter the level of miraculous. And otherwise, there was no way I would have tried to move a practice to see this kind of influence in a community. And our patients, there are patients today that are Seventh-day Adventists that found their place in the church through that office.
So, John, the first thing that we did as far as outreach ministry together was to start a free clinic inside the church. Now, this free clinic was, again, just very small, very simple. It was just one evening a week. One evening a month. And I think we accepted 6 patients at a time. You want to describe that free clinic and what it entailed?
Well, remember, the purpose of this connection here is the 3-legged stool. Now, the 3-legged stool has to stand on 3 legs. You have a pastor who's 1 leg. You have the physician representing the health work. That's another leg. And this team only represents, it's really kind of iconic. It doesn't have to be a pastor and a physician. It could be a cook and a Bible worker. It could be a masseuse and a student of Scripture. So it's just iconic, if you will, or an example of what medicine and ministry should be together. So there's 2 legs. What's the 3rd leg? The 3rd leg is the church. Without any one of those legs, the stool will fall. And so now the pastor was seeing this vision. He says, I need to get my church involved. I need my church to move because I have an entire regiment of individuals capable of doing battle in the world if they only know, number 1, is it okay? Number 2, is it safe? And number 3, does it really make a difference? And between the 2 of us, we could bring all of that together in one place. And that was the free clinic, an experiment to see what it would look like to bring the church into the community. And so we started accepting patients that had real problems, medical problems. And they weren't Adventist, but they were going to meet with us in the Seventh-day Adventist church. Some of these people were afraid of the Seventh-day Adventists, but were willing to go to a Seventh-day Adventist church in order to experience healing. That is powerful, my friends. When the community looks upon you as a place of healing, that is when there's power in it. And so we were going to have the church work with patients in the free clinic as health mentors, if you will. Or I don't remember what we called them, but they were co-workers to help encourage and strengthen and empower the patients during the month between our visits. And they were to be in contact with that person frequently, multiple times per week, and to bring them the aspects of lifestyle that they naturally lived already.
So they would come. I was the greeter, the registrar. I was the one that was, as they came through the front door of the church, I would greet them and direct them as far as where they needed to go and what they needed to do. So they would go and have their vitals taken, and then they would go and visit with Dr. John. And then the third thing would be the member who was teamed up with them would take them into another room and do some health education with them. The whole visit was about an hour and a half. And so there was a patient that came that she was a very rough type of individual.
There's sometimes a reason why people move to Idaho.
She was a very rough individual, very angry and very kind of mean. And she had a lot of problems. She would never have gone into a church if it was not for her health issues.
And may I add a little bit as well?
Yes.
And she was paired up. Now, this is a big woman, an aggressive woman, red in the face, strong, just kind of used words that weren't particularly kind. And she was paired up with this little, thoughtful, petite, southern, kind, gentle, Seventh-day Adventist, never an unkind word out of her mouth person. And that was the team we put together. And the person was given activities to do that any church member could do. Any church member here could be given the tasks that this person was given in order to be able to help the patient. But giving that had to happen through a person, happen through a relationship, and that's the team we put together.
So describe her attitude towards what she was being told to do. And
well, for instance, at the very beginning, there was a small interview period where data would be gathered by the staff member, the church member, from the individual about lifestyle, etc. And during the period of time they were discussing, the church member was listening to the individual saying how her back hurt. And she just mentioned in passing, well, you know, I understand that if you drink lots of water, sometimes that helps to rehydrate the spine, and maybe you'll have a little less pain. And the lady, of course, typical of her method, would be, water? I hate water. I'm not drinking water. I can't drink water. What do you mean, water? Like, whoa, that came at this church member like, whoa, what was that? Like an overflowing billow just blasted her. All right, settle down. Well, then, as they were talking, the woman was talking about her back, about her hip pain, you know, and she was saying, you know, well, if you maybe did some exercise and lost weight and moved that hip so range of motion, you know, just maybe some gentle walking, not this, you know, not heavy work or anything like that. Walking. I hate walking. I'm not going to walk. I won't be walking. Are you kidding me? What are you talking about walking? And this woman's like, she's blowing her mind like, wow, I can't make anything to say about this. And I think there was something else that she was dealing with, some other medical problems, but everything this
her
petite,
diet.
kind, oh, yes, the diet. She says, well, I don't remember what it was, whether it be weight loss or joint pain or whatever. She mentioned, you know, if you change your diet to one that's a little less, well, with inflammatory foods, I think is the way she put it. You know, it might be helpful if you just ate more vegetables. Vegetables? I hate vegetables. You think I'm going to eat vegetables? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the picture of what this woman was going through. When she finished this first time with this woman, she came to me afterwards, and she would look like she'd just been run over by a semi, and she kind of like went like, Dr. DeQuato, in her kind, sweet, gentle way, I don't think this is going to work. I'm not made out for this stuff. This is not my thing. I don't know how you do this. And I just told her, I said, you know what? I trusted this woman. I said, you know what? You just be you, and you realize that you're working with people who have never known Jesus. And you just be you, and let the Holy Spirit work, and he will. Trust, just trust. And according to the kind and generous spirit that she had, because God was working in her life, she says, yes, I will continue.
So when this patient came for the next month visit, this church member was in the foyer with me, waiting for her to come through the door. And so when this patient came through the door, she came up. We had a table with some literature on it, and she walked over to that table, and there was a Desire of Ages there, and so she picked up that Desire of Ages book and started leafing through it. And I just said to her, if you'd like to have that book, just keep it. It's yours. And so she stuck it underneath her arm. And then she went on to her visit. And
well, mind you, this little petite Seventh-day Adventist kind woman was sitting in the foyer waiting for her patient to come.
yeah.
And now in this particular practice, if we didn't have a church member present, the patient was not seen. And you couldn't substitute with somebody else. You were committed to that patient as a friend regardless. And that kept people coming. This woman didn't need that. She was there like early, and she was sitting on the hearth of the fireplace, facing the door, praying earnestly. Dear God, this woman is so hard. She doesn't want anything to do with you. Would you please do something? Help her some way. I can't speak to her. At least get her, get literature into her hands so that she can somehow see you. And as she did that, she watched this woman walk in, talk to Pastor Cablano, and this woman, hard as she was, took a Desire of Ages and placed it under her arm and walked into the medical visit. Half an hour later, I met with them in the medical portion of this. And as I began talking to this individual, we talked about depression as an issue. And what I try to do in my medical visits is I try to use principles of the gospel. You know, Pastor LaRue, you were right on when I was listening to what you were saying. As you said it, I'm like raising my hand saying, yes, 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 that's exactly the way to be. Because the real goal of medical ministry is not just healing. It's more about than just healing. It is about salvation. And it's the tools of salvation that actually change people so that they have power to change. It's gratitude for sins forgiven that give people power to make an alteration in their life. That's how we became Christians in the first place. The power of sins forgiven gave us capability of accepting Jesus' free gift. And so praying for these things is not unreasonable when it comes to our patients. And so I walked into the room and I'm talking about principles. And I say this principle that we all know, and we're talking about depression. I say, well, I wanted to share with you a principle that will help depression. Well, what's that? The principle is, as we behold, we become changed. Now, you know what that means. But this woman, it was foreign to her. What's that mean? Well, what that means is, if you look at something violent, and that's all you see, you will become violent. If what you see is sarcastic and critical and crude, you will become sarcastic, critical, and crude. But if what you see is beautiful, if what you see is holy and wonderful, if what you see is powerful, you will become beautiful, holy, wonderful, and powerful. She says, there is nothing beautiful. There's nothing good out in this world. And I said, there is. She said, there is not. I said, there is. She said, there is not. And I said, what's under your arm? She pulls a book out. It's a book. I recognize that book. What's that book say? What's the title? The Desire of Ages. I said, you read that book just a little, a couple times a week. You just focus on what's in the book. Before you go to bed, spend a couple minutes to go through a page or two. You will begin to receive that which you look at, and it will change you. Well, we went on to the rest of the visit, and that was the end of that time. Okay, go.
So the next month, when she came to her visit, I was there in the lobby. It's hard to describe what she looked like. It looked like she floated through the door. She was floating on the air. Her face was just a bright beam of sunshine. Smiles from side to side. The first words out of her mouth was, that book cured my depression. She had read the entire book from beginning to end in 1 month. She had read all the scriptures that are referenced in the book, and she had begun to teach that to her children.
When you think about what happened, I walked into that room that time. I didn't know this yet. I walked into the room that visit, and this woman, of course, with the hardness that she had, somebody had placed, I thought in jest, a large bottle of water right in front of her. Her back was to me as I walked in, and I thought, oh, somebody's pulling the wool over my eyes. Somebody's going to be jesting me. So I walk in, I look at her, I said, Dad, just whose water is that? She looks up at me and says, shut up. That's my water. I said, wait, you don't like water. She says, I drink few of those every day. And I said, what? And then the church member looked up at me and she says, and that's not all. And I said, what else? And she says, and I'm walking every day and my back pain and my hip pain is better. And I said, are you serious? And she says, and the church member looks up at me and she says, and that's not all. And she said, that's not all. And she says, no, and I'm not depressed anymore. And I said, well, how did this happen? She says, that book you gave me? I said, yeah. She says, I sat down and read it, and I kept reading it, and it began to change me. And I said, well, what do you mean it began to change you? She said, I sat there and I live with my stepdaughters, and they hate my guts. And they wouldn't be around me. And they saw that I was changing. And they kept coming out of the rooms where I would chase them, and they kept coming asking, what is going on with you? She says, I was becoming a different person. And finally they came out and they weren't going to let me be alone anymore. They said, I got to figure out what's going on with you, Mom. She says, well, then sit down and be quiet. And so she said, she started reading, and she said, well, what are you reading? I'm reading the book, Desire of Ages. Well, and then she was opening the Bible, and she said, what is that? She said, I'm reading the Bible. She said, well, read me some, Mom. So they read some to the verse, and the girl says, I don't know what that means. What does that mean, Mom? She says, you don't know what that means? And she began to explain to her stepchild, out of the spirit of prophecy, the meaning of the text that she was reading. You look at what just happened. You healed somebody physically. You healed somebody mentally, emotionally. You healed somebody socially with their in-law, with their stepdaughter, and you healed somebody spiritually, all at the same time. Power of the gospel happens at a miraculous stage when there is love between pastors and physicians, medicine and ministry together. That's what happens.
Yeah, that was one of the most impactful. We've had many experiences like that, but that was one of the most impactful experiences to show the connection between the physical and the spiritual, the emotional and the social, how God works to bring healing. So the next big thing that we did together was to invite 6 young people to come for a summer as a team ministry, what are we calling that? The term is just slipping my mind. Company evangelism for 7 weeks during the summer. Describe that.
Well, I have students that come, and residents and sometimes physicians that come to my office to learn about how to do medical ministry in a medical practice, and it's typical medical practice seeing non-Adventist people in the community. And I invite students to come, and they experience this. And one of these students had gone back to Loma Linda, and she had contacted me. She said, I would love to do evangelism with you. Is there a way to do that? And I said, yeah, let's do a summertime program. We got some things that we can do, and I'll pay you a small stipend, and you come up here, and I'll pay your travel expenses, and I'll spend. And she says, I got 5 of my friends, or 6 of us total. I said, great, we'll spend 7 weeks doing this, and we'll plan on it. Well, I'm a small practitioner. I started with nothing. I have nothing. I'm on a pastor's salary. I didn't have any income, but I had resources of places to go to get some income to help to support this. And just like 2 weeks prior, it all fell through. And it's like, I can't do this. So I called them and I said, guys, I can't have you up here because I have no more money. I don't have any money for the stipend. I have no money for your travel. And so I'm going to have to call it off. And they said, you know what? Can we just pray about it? Yeah, we can pray about it. We'll come back together next week. We'll see what we come up with. Well, the next week they asked, you prayed about it. Did you guys find anything? I said, well, I didn't find anything. How about you? They said, well, no. And I said, all right, well, I'm just going to have to call it off. She said, Dr. Crowder, we've been talking, me and my medical school friends, my nursing friends, that we're all going to come up. we're going to come anyway. I said, well, you guys, that's too much. I mean, you guys are students. You've got student loans. You've got cars. You've got apartments. You've got phones. You've got insurance. You've got books. I mean, I can't take from all of that and have you do the work up here. And she said, Dr. Quad, you didn't hear. We want to come, and we're coming anyway. It's on our dime. We're going to do it. I said, you guys, Dr. Torquato, if you will accept us. Well, who am I to turn away somebody who will sacrifice for the Lord? Okay, fine, you come. So they came up, and I talked to the church, and the church, when they found they had these young people willing to come up for nothing, the church fell in love with these people before they ever showed up. You have interns now that are doing the same thing here. You have 7, now 8 of them, I understand. That is powerful that you have a place. You started far ahead of where we could have been. What a powerful thing you have at your disposal. God has blessed you already. So these kids came, we put on a program, and the program was, we invited 24 of my patients and the balance 36 of the patients from the community from advertisement. They came to our community health and wellness program. It was 3 nights a week, 7 weeks. Now, 3 nights a week is pretty heavy, and 7 weeks is a long time. These people paid money to come to this program. Not a lot, but they paid money. And so when they came, we did one time, it was kind of like, I'll describe the program. We did a prayer and praise, very beginning. Wait a sec, these are not Adventists. We started, and I gave them the rationale. Prayer is an important part of healing, and I explained some of the science behind it. And I said, so we're going to pray, and we're going to also do a kind deed for other people, because, kindness towards others is healing for you. And so therefore, we're going to do this. And so we did prayer and praise, and we did an offering, people giving money towards this beneficent work that they were going to do. And then we do a health program, and then a cooking discussion. And then these kids, these interns, if you will, they went and divided up, and the whole class would go to their tables, and they'd have like a little Sabbath school on a medical health program kind of issue with spiritual principles kind of interlaced. And that was the program for one night. And then they did a cooking school another night. And again, the kids are in charge of this. And then they did on the third night, Friday night, they had an evangelistic series. And there was one woman who came to this program. She says, who's in charge here? And kind of like the first lady we just talked about, and they pointed to me, and she comes up, are you in charge here? And I'm kind of backing up against the wall. Yeah, I guess I kind of am. I don't like Seventh-day Adventists. And this is a Seventh-day Adventist church, and I don't like being here. But I want your health program. Can you, as a Seventh-day Adventist physician, can you teach me your health program without giving me your doctrines? And I said, absolutely, I can. I can give you that health program without the doctrines, as long as you can be taken care of by a physician who believes those doctrines and practices their principles on you. This woman became the one who loved our young people the most. She invited all of her regular church to a pool party so she could invite her interns to the same pool party to enjoy the relationship. And she's the one that came to the Friday night evangelistic series the most. That is the power of young people working in a church in ministry. So these young people then would go to the homes of the 24 of my patients to be health coaches. And they had, for 7 weeks, they had to meet with these patients every single day for 7 weeks. And they would come to me and ask, why so intensely? Why can't we just 3 times a week? You got 7 weeks to make an impact. You're going to meet every single day, and you will be their friend. So they were all given 4 patients. They met them every single day for 7 weeks. At the end of 7 weeks, 6 of the 24 of my patients were starting to keep the Sabbath.
We need to fast forward.
Yeah,
Our time is
Can I make a quick statement?
disappearing. Yes.
Out of those 6 that became individuals that were keeping the Sabbath, all 6 of them were eventually baptized as a result of the young interns who were in our facility working.
Yeah, for just 7 weeks in the summertime. It was an incredible experience. Before that time, I had been transferred over to Spokane to plant a church there. And so we were starting to plant a church in North Spokane, and we planted the Northview Seventh-day Adventist Church. And while we were in the process of building that church, I realized what we had done for those 7 weeks needed to be done on a wider, broader scale. And so we talked more, even though we were at that point about an hour apart. And you were willing to come over to Spokane. And we took a Sabbath school room, a space that was designated for a Sabbath school room that was still not built out yet, and we converted that into a medical office inside the church. And that office is
I'm still there running it.
Still running that today. And so we wanted to have a group of young people, not just for 7 weeks, but we wanted to have a group of young people for 2 years. Come and do the company evangelism health ministry approach. Tell us about that.
Well, if I could ask the deacons to hand out some cards that I have, because there's so much to share with you in terms of the things that were learned. I'm going to give you a place where you can go to get principles and ideas about ministry that we're going to be able to share on this website that you're going to get this card from. You go ahead and give one to each person, please. And then we're going to do the video because we're just going to be closing up now as we finish. This video talks about some of the rationale, so you understand why we were going to do what we were going to do, and you'll have the opportunity to see some of the background. So would you play that video for us?
The program was called Total Health Spokane, and this is the video that we put together for that.
If Jesus was walking the earth today, how would he reach the people?
As Seventh-day Adventists, we have a unique history that speaks to this.
In 1910, the aged Ellen White wrote the following.
During the night of February 27, 1910, a representation was given me in which the unworked cities were presented before me as a living reality. For months, the situation has been impressed upon my mind, and I urge that companies be organized and diligently trained to labor in our important cities.
In that same year, a man by the name of John Tyndall was commissioned to pioneer this work. With the formation of these evangelistic companies, teams of Adventists ministered to the practical needs of the people, both publicly and in their homes. Those companies were teams of pastors, physicians, nurses, cooks, literature evangelists, Bible workers, and church members. In love, they taught health principles, cooking skills, and simple rational treatments, among other things, all alongside evangelistic efforts. As a result, hundreds committed their lives to the Lord in baptism. Over many years, it was found that the retention rate was an astounding 75 to 90%. But sadly, over time, the directive given by the Lord's messenger was lost sight of and nearly forgotten.
Fast forwarding to 2014, a group of 6 young people traveled to a small town in Hayden, Idaho to revive the work of John Tyndall. Not knowing how their needs would be supplied, they spent an intense 7 weeks of service pouring out their hearts to 24 patients. The work was centered around the patient need, whether it was teaching healthy cooking, helping them shop for food, or opening the Word of God. Not only were the hearts of these patients touched, but 25% of them committed to keeping the Sabbath. If such results could be seen in 2 months with 6 young people, what kind of outcomes would be seen in 2 years with 20 young people? Friends, this is our vision. In Tyndall's footsteps, we seek to trailblaze this lost ministry again.
The diseases, heartaches, and spiritual longings we will meet in Spokane are but a sampling of the needs in thousands of other cities. We want to revive a method of comprehensive health evangelism that will be reproducible. The pen of inspiration tells us,
"It will be seen that the glory shining in the face of Jesus is the glory of self-sacrificing love."
this is our motive. This is our vision.
So would you consider joining us in reviving Christ's method of evangelism?
Just let it roll.
We want this to go to the whole world. We want people to realize that if we minister as Jesus ministered, that he would bless. It's Christ's method of evangelism.
These are young people, my friends. Young people who have made a difference to the church of God. There are thousands. We have an entire army of young people, of possibilities that could do what these young people did here in Michigan, in California, in Idaho, in Washington. Given the vision that you have, do not despise the day of small beginnings. Do not neglect the power of the pastoral call. Do not think that the ordination of the church is without power. And do not think that the pastoral vision has no strength. And recognize when you leave the average routine of just clocking in on the same opportunities of work to a place where you love one another and are caring for each other's mission, suddenly you leave the mundane and the routine and you enter the level of the miraculous. I would pray that that's what this church will experience.
Yeah, the connection between the two needs to be a deep commitment on each part. We wish we had time to tell you so much more, especially including all, we've shared some of our successes, but we have probably twice that many failures or more. And to learn from our failures is helpful as well. But we just wanted to share with you our journey and how that, it's taken us time to grow, to learn these principles. It's taken me a lifetime. And so I'm patient with others who need to have a chance to learn and grow as well. But hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit from our experiences. And as we close, we'd like to just ask the Lord's blessing upon you. Father, we just thank you for this time together. We thank you for your love. We thank you for the journey that you have put Dr. Torquato and myself on. And we've been able to share that a little bit. But Father, the whole journey is about Jesus and his love and his goodness, his mercy, his patience and long-suffering. And we just want to give you all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise. And we just pray that you will bring conviction upon every heart here, that every person is to be involved in medical missionary work. Every believer in Jesus is to follow Jesus, who was the greatest medical missionary ever on this earth. And so we want to commit ourselves again to you now. And we thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.